The mansion had a way of rehearsing silence. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath, crystals suspended like a constellation captured mid-twinkle. The marble floors reflected a perfect world of clean lines and curated art, but the echoes that lived in those surfaces were not the boisterous, unruly ones that children make. There were measured steps, polished voices, the rustle of expensive fabric. In the longest corridor, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of terraced gardens and a river that braided the horizon. It was all so beautifully arranged, as if the house itself were trying to convince anyone who entered that life, here, was flawless. He arrived before the clock chimed 6, which never happened. He slid his key into the lock with the stealth of someone who wanted to be a ghost in his own life. He carried in the late autumn air and a feeling he had tucked beneath the lapel of his charcoal suit, a tiredness that didn't belong to his body but to a future he was trying not to imagine. The foyer greeted him with the smell of lemon oil and the faintest memory of summer: cut grass, warm stone, a child laughing. He almost saw it, the ghost of a sound, and then it dissolved. The butler appeared. Polished in every way, he wore a sympathy that looked like a tie too tight. "You're early, sir. Dinner is still being prepared." He nodded. "I won't be eating." He didn't say it, but the staff knew it was one of those days. The days with the small white envelopes from the specialists, embossed in delicate script that promised hope and delivered careful sentences that meant the opposite. A new reading. An old verdict. Words like degenerative, and unlikely, and acceptance. He kept his jacket on as he walked deeper into the house, passing portraits by artists his acquaintances envied. All those watchful eyes. He thought it funny that grateful donors had their names carved into museum wings for less art than what stared down at him here, and yet he couldn't buy the one thing he wanted. He could purchase the sun if it were for sale, and it still wouldn't mean his children could see it. In the library, curtains sat half-drawn as if remembering to be modest. He touched the spine of a book he had read in college to prove he could read hard things. His fingers didn't press, they hovered, as if the leather could bruise. He stayed there a moment to collect the pieces of himself that daylight stole and business polished smooth. He thought of the twins upstairs, the way their hands searched, the way they learned a room like a language, testing the syntax of furniture, the grammar of a threshold, the punctuation of a banister's newel post where a carved lion's mouth was cool and round. The world did not arrive to them all at once through sight. It came in slow syllables: warmth of sunlight on the left cheek, a draught at ankle height, the smell of a vase that had fresh lilies yesterday but not today. He had promised himself he would never let pity be the first thing his children heard when he entered a room. He had built his life on refusing pity. But the envelopes had a way of loosening that knot he tied in his chest each morning. He left the library and followed a sound he couldn't place at first, thin, tentative, like a bird trying out its throat. It was coming from the music room. He paused outside the door, one hand on the frame. The room beyond had always served as a shrine to a life he assumed would visit eventually, a grand piano with a lustrous lid heavy as a promise, 2 fiddles in a glass case, a harp none of them knew how to tune. He bought instruments the way some fathers bought fishing gear or small bikes with training wheels. Aspirations arranged and dusted. The sound quivered again. 3 notes in a row, climbing the same short staircase and stopping on the landing. He eased the door just enough to give breath a path. 2 small backs, side by side on the piano bench, shoulders nearly touching. The twins wore matching knit sweaters, cream with a ribbed collar, sleeves a little long because they refused to stop growing. Their hair caught the afternoon light where it brushed from the window, making a halo not even they would know they had. Between them, a woman leaned in with the steadiness of a lighthouse. Her skin was deep and warm, her hair gathered at the nape of her neck in a tidy knot. She wasn't imposing. She didn't fill the room with any kind of drama. She simply occupied space as if the earth itself had quietly decided, yes, this is exactly where you belong. Listen to the room, she murmured, voice wrapped in velvet. Not your fingers. Not the keys. The room. The boy, Aaron, tilted his head, the delicate movement of a child who has learned to lean for information most people grab with a glance. The girl, Amelia, pressed her lips together like a soldier preparing for parade. 4 beats of silence. Then a single key, middle C, sounded and held. Not wandered, held. The woman didn't praise. She waited. On the second attempt, the notes steadied even more, and an echo returned from somewhere high in the coffered ceiling. That's the room saying hello, the woman said. Say hello back. Move 1 step to your right. Gently. A second note. Then a third. The simple melody of a scale, but not played like numbers counted. Played like someone walking barefoot on a creek bed, testing the stones. He felt his throat tighten before his mind knew why. The doctors had given him 100 lists of things the twins would do differently. None of the lists included this improbable braid of attention and courage. The woman's hands hovered, never grabbing theirs, teaching without imprisoning. He knew who she was only in job description. The new maid the agency had sent after the head housekeeper left abruptly. He had signed the paperwork while in the back seat of a black car between a board call and a legal review. He hadn't looked at her face. Today, from behind the door, he studied the architecture of her patients, and realized he had admitted something into his house with more structure than stone. Mariah! A voice hissed from the hallway, not caring to keep its disdain private. What are you doing? The butler's syllables were all angles. The children are to be kept away from that instrument. The woman didn't look up. They're not near the instrument, she said. They're near their own courage. The butler inhaled, a sound that condescended. Your duties are listed. Music instruction is not among them. Then consider this dusting, she said, tapping the lid with a knuckle that made no sound at all. The room's been waiting to breathe. He was not used to anyone speaking to his staff with quiet defiance. He was not used to anyone speaking to his staff at all, except to give orders. He was the one who was supposed to enforce lines. And yet, in that moment, the lines he had drawn around his children felt like walls built for strangers. He stepped in at last, making his presence known. The butler snapped to attention with relief he didn't bother to hide. Sir? He said, flicking a glance at the woman. The twins straightened, heads turning toward the shift in the air, the small change the body makes when it decides to perform a certain kind of respect. He softened his voice to keep it from breaking. What's this? He asked, because questions were safer than confessions. The woman met his eyes. No shrinking there. She had the gaze of someone who had learned not to apologize for existing. They're listening, she said. And the room is listening back. We don't, he started then stopped. He had intended to say, we don't do false hope. He was going to say, do you know what it costs when they dream? He chose instead. The piano is expensive. Then it should earn its keep, she replied, not as a challenge but as a fact. A tool unused becomes a shrine, and shrines are for things that died. The butler made a small, offended sound in his throat. He went to the window, because instead of arguing he needed the anchor of the world outside. The river moved with the quiet insistence of time. On sunny days he had once held his son up to that same window and pointed, forgetting the gesture meant nothing. He closed his hand into a fist and felt the outline of the latest envelope against his palm through the thin pocket lining. Acceptance. The word everyone kept recommending like a diet. As if he could feed his heart obedience, and starve it of ache. The twins whispered together, as if they shared one breath and passed it back and forth. It tickled in the air, Amelia said. And in my wrist, Aaron added, pressing the heel of his hand gently into the edge of the keys. Like a hum I could hold. The woman nodded. You mapped the sound. Most people only hear with their ears. You're hearing with your skin. You'll trust that map the more you use it. He struggled against the urge to protect them from even this sweetness. Protection had become a habit that made him clumsy. He turned toward the door. The butler stood in the threshold like a blockade, a silver tray balanced on his palm to justify his presence. It gleamed like a mirror, and in its warped reflection he saw a version of himself he didn't like, wide-shouldered, narrow-hearted. A crash detonated in the hallway as the tray slipped from the butler's hand and struck the marble. The sound exploded, shards skittering. The twins flinched in unison, hands flying from the keys. In the stunned silence that followed, a single shard spun tight circles and then lay down flat, its last vibration a sigh you could almost miss. The butler exhaled hard. "Clumsy me," he said, his tone anything but apologetic. Amelia's fingers found her brother's sleeve. She didn't cry. Neither did he. They waited to understand if the world had just broken or only a piece of it. He inhaled through his nose, old anger waking. The woman stood first, calm settling around her like a cloak. "Are you hurt?" she asked the twins, and when they shook their heads, she gently guided their hands back to the starting keys, her palms hovering just above theirs. "Then listen again. The room is different now. It still says hello? It always will." He wanted to say something decisive, to remind everyone that this was his home, his authority, his rules. What came out instead was small and more honest than he intended. "Will it?" he began, and had to swallow. "Will it always say hello? For those who listen," she said. "Yes." Footsteps gathered in the corridor as other staff drifted closer, pulled by the gravitational field that formed around any moment that threatened to become truth. He felt their judgment the way one feels a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. The new maid teaching the blind children to play. How quaint. How inappropriate. How dangerous. He heard, even before anyone spoke, the contempt disguised as concern. He held up a hand to keep them from entering, and to his own surprise they stopped. The twins sounded a note together. The room answered with a tremble so delicate it barely touched the ear. The woman smiled. The butler stooped to his mess and scraped pieces of himself from the floor with each shard he lifted. He looked again at the children, at the place where their shoulders met like two halves of a bridge, and he understood that his house could keep rehearsing silence forever if he let it. He also understood that silence had never been neutral. It had been a cage with silk ribbons tied around the bars. On the piano, 3 notes climbed, careful and brave. In the corridor, whispers sharpened into sentences he would have to confront. He stayed where he was, feeling the exact moment when the life he had curated and the life that wanted to be born collided, not with a scream but with a single, unwavering tone that refused to apologize for existing. From the far wing of the house, a door slammed. Somewhere outside, a wind rose and bent the river grass. The crystal prisms of the chandelier trembled and cast small rainbows that nobody noticed. He thought he knew what the next hour would be: a reprimand, a retreat, a dinner eaten in compartments, faith carried like a heavy tray. But the twins' hands rose as one, and the woman's voice softened to a thread. "Again," she said. "This time, let the note find you." They pressed. The sound bloomed. And from the hallway, a guest's voice, early, unannounced, already judging, pierced the threshold with a brittle laugh. "Is he parading them at last?" The note wavered in the air, brave and exposed. He turned toward the door, pulse in his throat, and realized he stood exactly between what the world wanted from him and what his children needed. The laugh came again, closer. He didn't move. The morning after the sound of that brittle laugh still lived in the walls, Jonathan descended the staircase with the feeling that he was stepping into a stage set for a play he had not agreed to act in. The servants hushed when they saw him, as if guilt were contagious and they might catch it. In the breakfast room the silver covers gleamed, untouched. He could not eat. He never could on days when the air was thick with rumor. It was already obvious that word had spread. He overheard it in the kitchen, the new maid teaching the blind twins music, the master tolerating it, the idea that perhaps the Harrington fortune was finally unraveling into eccentricity. Money could buy marble, but it could not purchase silence from wagging tongues. The twins entered moments later, their small hands brushing the walls like explorers mapping a cave. Their steps were lighter than he had ever heard them. Amelia smiled in the direction of the table, her head slightly lifted as if following a sound no one else could hear. Aaron tapped the edge of a chair with his palm, then pulled it out with unerring precision. They sat without hesitation. For years they had been cautious, hesitant, fearful of mistakes. Now, After one evening with Mariah, they moved as if the world itself were a puzzle they could solve with patience. He should have felt pride. Instead, dread sat on his shoulders. He imagined the whispers waiting at the club, at the bank, at every dinner where men in dark suits traded success like currency. Mariah poured juice into their glasses. She did not curtsy or bow her head in exaggerated respect. She did her work with the calm confidence of someone who understood service without servitude. "Today," she said, her voice as steady as the pouring stream, "we'll walk to the garden. There are roses that open wider in the morning. Their smell will guide you." He set down his paper sharply. "That won't be possible." Her eyes met his, calm but unyielding. "Why not? The paths are uneven. They could stumble. There are steps down to the lower terrace. It's too dangerous." Aaron's small voice cut in. "Papa, I want to hear the river." Amelia added softly. "And the birds. We hear them through the window." He cleared his throat, buying time with the scrape of cutlery. "It isn't safe," he repeated. "The world outside is," he faltered. He had meant to say cruel. He had meant to say unforgiving. But what came out was loud. Mariah set the jug down. "Then they'll learn to be louder." It was not insolence. It was certainty. Her words lodged like a thorn. The twins perked up, waiting. He waved a hand, unwilling to argue further, and the subject dropped. But he knew it had only been postponed. He sensed already that this woman had no intention of folding her beliefs to fit his fear. Later, in town, at the Harrington Club, the whispers arrived right on cue. "John," one man said, swirling his brandy with theatrical pity, "we heard you've engaged a rather unorthodox maid. Music lessons for the little ones?" The others chuckled. "Charming! But surely you don't want them paraded about. Best to keep them comfortable, safe." That word, safe, drenched in condescension. Another leaned close, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "You don't want them to suffer illusions, my friend. Hope is crueler than darkness." He forced a laugh, but it was brittle. The truth was he did not know anymore if protecting them meant shielding them, or if it meant caging them. He left early, ignoring the looks that followed him like daggers. By evening, the house buzzed with preparations for the annual gala. Chandeliers dusted, wine crates unloaded, strings tuned. It was the night the city's elite gathered under his roof, a night to remind everyone that Jonathan Harrington's empire stood unshaken. He had already decided the twins would remain upstairs with their nurse. They had never attended before. Tonight would not be different. But when the first guests arrived, he caught sight of them at the edge of the ballroom. Two small figures, guided by Mariah, dressed in pale formalwear that made them glow under the candlelight. His breath caught. How had they slipped past? Amelia held Aaron's hand tightly, but neither looked lost. Their chins were lifted, their ears twitching like animals alive to every vibration. The crowd hushed. Glasses paused midway to lips. Whispers darted across the hall. He brought them down. Jonathan's stomach clenched. His reputation, his shield, was cracking. He moved toward them quickly, intending to usher them away. But Mariah stepped subtly aside, leaving them in the center of the room. Their fingers brushed the polished wood of the grand piano. "No," he muttered under his breath, his voice nearly swallowed by the chatter. But the twins did not hear. Amelia's small hands found the keys, and a note sounded, hesitant at first, then clearer. She pressed another, then another, stringing them like beads. Aaron hummed alongside her, catching a pattern. The melody gathered itself, no longer fragile but insistent. It wasn't perfect, it trembled, but it lived. The ballroom froze. Men who had dismissed the Harrington children as a shameful footnote now leaned forward unconsciously. Women who had rehearsed sympathy gasped into jeweled fingers. The twins played as if the piano itself were their sight, the keys a map they navigated by trust. Jonathan's chest ached. He had wanted to protect them from embarrassment, but here, before 100 critical eyes, they were fearless. Applause rose like a tide, reluctant at first, then rolling into thunder. He felt tears sting but blinked them away, unwilling to be seen weak. For one moment, the Harrington name was not whispered in pity but marveled at in awe. And then the spell shattered. From the far end of the hall, a voice laced with venom rang out. "A sweet trick," said Victoria Caldwell, her gown glittering like malice itself. "But still, they are blind. It's cruel to make them perform for pity." Her laugh, sharp and brittle, sliced through the applause. The twins faltered on the keys. The melody wavered. Jonathan's face burned. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some nodded at her words, their relief palpable. Permission to dismiss what they had just witnessed as novelty, nothing more. Jonathan's instinct was to gather his children, to sweep them back upstairs, to spare them. But Mariah moved first. She knelt by the piano bench, her voice low but steady. "Don't stop. The room still listens. Show them what only you can." The children hesitated, then pressed on, their notes fragile but stubborn. Jonathan's hands curled into fists at his side. He could feel the weight of society pressing against him, daring him to retreat. He had spent his life building walls of respectability, and now those walls shook as if an earthquake had begun beneath his feet. The applause dwindled to polite murmurs. The children's music reached the last note and died. Silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. He could feel every eye on him. In that silence, Mariah stood, her shoulders square, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. She said nothing yet, but Jonathan sensed it. Something was coming. Something that would not let the evening end in polite dismissal. And he felt both terror and awe at what she might unleash. The room sat in the kind of silence that hurts, a hush sharpened by judgment. Crystal glasses clinked faintly in nervous hands, shoes shifted against the marble, and Victoria Caldwell's smile curled like a blade. Jonathan's heart pounded in his ears, each beat a reminder that he had failed to shield his children from humiliation. The twins sat frozen at the piano, Amelia's small hands hovering just above the keys, Aaron's lips pressed tight to keep the tremor from showing. He wanted to move, to rush them away, to end this cruelty, but his feet might as well have been carved into the marble floor. Then Mariah stepped forward. The maid, his maid, yet she stood as if she had every right to address them all. Her voice cut through the ballroom without rising in volume, firm and unshakable. "Not pity," she said. "You hear music and call it a trick. You see blindness and call it tragedy. But you are the blind ones. You only see with your eyes. These children see with their whole selves." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some were offended, others were caught off guard by her audacity. Victoria narrowed her eyes, ready to pounce. Jonathan's pulse roared. He wanted to silence Mariah before she burned every bridge he had spent years constructing. Yet, as he looked at her, he saw no fear. He saw conviction carved into every line of her face, and for the first time in years, he envied someone else's courage. Mariah turned back to the twins. She crouched low, her hands steady, her voice dropping to a whisper that nonetheless carried to every corner of the room. "Show them," she said. "Show them that you don't need sight to shine." And then, to the shock of everyone, she reached into the bag she had carried with her all evening, a simple cloth satchel that had seemed so ordinary no one had questioned it. From within, she drew a violin. Its wood gleamed faintly under the chandeliers, polished though clearly cherished for use, not display. She placed a blindfold over her own eyes. The gesture was deliberate, slow, unignorable. Gasps echoed like scattered sparks. "If they can play without sight," she said softly, "so can I." She raised the violin to her chin, set the bow, and for a breath the world seemed to stop. Then the first note rang out. It was not a timid sound. It was fierce, raw, alive, as though the violin itself had been waiting all its life to be heard. The strings sang in a voice that climbed and plunged, full of hunger and fire. The sound filled every crevice of the ballroom, soaring into the crystal chandeliers, spilling against the gilded walls. She played not like a servant, not like a tutor, but like a master. The crowd leaned forward despite themselves, caught in the storm she summoned. Amelia gasped softly at the surge of sound, her hands instinctively reaching for the piano keys. Aaron hummed, matching pitch with uncanny instinct, then began to weave a counter-melody with his voice. The three of them joined, violin, piano, and child's song. It was not rehearsed, not polished, but it was real. The music built like a storm tide, wave after wave, refusing to recede. Jonathan stood motionless, watching as his children transformed before him. No longer shadows hidden upstairs, no longer secrets locked behind mansion walls. They were radiant, unafraid, defiant against every whisper of pity. He realized with a jolt that he had been the one chaining them with his fear. He had been their jailer, not their protector. And now, before the judgment of high society, they were breaking free. The final chord crashed like thunder. Silence followed, deep and absolute. No one breathed. Even Victoria Caldwell's lips parted, though she quickly closed them, unwilling to show awe. And then, at last, applause erupted. Not polite, not hesitant, wild, rising, unstoppable. Guests stood, clapping until their palms stung. A few even wept openly, mascara streaking down powdered cheeks. For a moment, the Harrington twins were not the blind heirs to a fortune but prodigies, symbols of something greater than wealth. But Victoria Caldwell would not allow it. She rose, her voice slicing through the storm of applause. "Touching," she sneered. "But do not be fooled. They cannot see, and no amount of parlor tricks will change that. What future awaits them? Will they run companies? Lead armies? No. They are a spectacle, nothing more." The clapping faltered. Some guests glanced at Jonathan, waiting for him to shrink, to concede, to tuck his children back into obscurity. He felt the weight of their eyes like chains around his throat. Before he could speak, Mariah lowered her violin and turned to Victoria. Her voice was calm, but every syllable struck like a hammer. "You mistake blindness for weakness. Weakness is not what they carry. Weakness is hiding behind cruelty because you fear what you cannot understand." The room held its breath. Victoria's face twisted. "You dare lecture me?" Mariah's gaze did not waver. "I dare tell the truth." A ripple moved through the guests, half shock, half admiration. Jonathan stood at the center of it all, torn between terror and pride. For years, he had lived his life in service to reputation, to appearances, to the iron grip of society's expectations. But now he saw those expectations for what they were, chains of gold, beautiful and suffocating. His children deserved more. Aaron tugged his sister's hand. "Did they like it?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Amelia smiled, tilting her head toward the lingering echoes in the room. "I think the walls liked it," she replied. Jonathan's throat closed. He wanted to say something, anything, to his children, but the words stuck. For the first time, he realized that his silence might be more damaging than ridicule. The applause began again, scattered but growing, drowning out Victoria's mutters. People surged forward to praise the twins, to shake Jonathan's hand, to pretend they had always believed in possibility. He saw their opportunism clearly, and for once, he did not care. His children had stood in the harshest light and shone. But as the evening wound down, he knew this was only the beginning. Society was fickle. Tonight they applauded, tomorrow they would sneer again. The newspapers would write their stories, twisting miracles into spectacles. Investors would question his judgment. Partners would wonder if he had gone soft. He could already hear the murmurs. "The Harrington fortune is cursed. He parades his blind children for pity, a disgrace to the family name." And yet, as he watched Mariah guiding his twins back toward the staircase, he understood something with a clarity that startled him. He did not care about the family name. Not anymore. For years he had thought blindness meant darkness, that his children lived in an endless night. But tonight he had seen them illuminate a room brighter than any chandelier. As Victoria glared from across the ballroom, her lips tight with fury, Jonathan allowed himself the smallest smile. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of freedom. But freedom came with cost. The storm outside this house would be worse than the whispers inside it. He knew it. And as he stood in the fading applause, he realized the real battle was only beginning. Would you like me to continue into Part 4 with the same 1,000-word depth, carrying directly into resolution and poetic justice?